Hey, good morning, Olive Branch family. We're really glad that you joined us here this morning. Now, usually I don't do the hosting on the online service, but Pastor Jeremiah came to me today and he said, I'm having a bad hair day, so here I am. I just wish I had hair like him, but that's a topic for another day. Anyways, Pastor Ken is here to talk about intersections today. So let's hear what he has to say on that. And I also want to remind you that we gather here every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. So if you haven't been here in person yet, we would love to see you and look forward to seeing you when you come. So God bless you. Have a great day.
You see beginning and end. God of the rescue, God of the breakthrough, how great is your faithfulness. You're not done yet. No eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard, no one could ever comprehend. Your word will be enough, your promise we will trust. Greater things are still ahead. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. God in my seeking, God in my dreaming, you put a song in my soul. And God in the God, I'm believing you'll do the impossible. You're not done yet, no, no. No eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard, no one could ever comprehend. Your word will be enough, your promise we will trust. Greater things are still ahead. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. You're up to something right now. You're doing a new thing right now. God, let your glory come down. Don't hold back, don't hold back. You're up to something right now. You're doing a new thing right now. God, let your glory come down. Don't hold back, don't hold back. You're moving mountains right now. You're breaking chains right now, right now. And God, let your glory fall down. Don't hold back, don't hold back. No eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard, no one could ever comprehend. Your word will be enough, your promise we will trust. Greater things are still ahead. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. Oh no, no, you're not done yet. Greater things are still ahead. You're not done
We've been in this whole series of talks called Broken When Life Rocks Your World. In other words, when stuff comes along and it breaks you, it changes things, it hurts you, lots of things go on. And when we're in the middle of that, we experience pain. Now, pain, of course, is the antithesis of everything that we want. You know, if we had our way, we'd like to go with the slippers, we'd like to go with a pillow, we'd like to go with, all the stuff that goes along with comfort. We'd choose an easy chair if we had a chance. But that's not the way life is. Life isn't like that. And so we go along, stuff happens, like recently happened with COVID, and it rocks our world. It changes things up. And all of a sudden, we wonder what's going on. Now, one of the biggest issues when it comes to faith is this whole issue that we talk about as Christians, especially, that there's a loving God, and then there's suffering and injustice in the world. So how does that match up? People think to themselves, well, if he's all powerful, then why doesn't he solve all the stuff? Why didn't he do something about our pain? Why doesn't he give me a better life? Why doesn't he give other people a better life? So that's one of the questions that come up. So it creates dissonance in our world, and we have to figure that out. We have to come to some sort of peace that God is able to coexist in all of this, and that what he is doing is way bigger than what we experience. But today I want to talk about intersections. 9 months ago, I was on my way here to church to speak for the morning service, and up at Major Mac and Highway 48, just north of us here at the church, I got clobbered at the intersection. Now, that intersection changed my whole day, as it always does if you've ever been in an accident, and it sometimes changes more than that, because I still had to speak that day. I still had to get back and forth to work, and my car was totaled, so it was not going to be helping me out. And then when you have an accident, you're dealing with insurance, and you're dealing with, having car dealers and everything, and et cetera, et cetera. You just, all of a sudden, everything changes, and you got to make time for all these changes in your life that are going on. Now, what I'd like to do, with your permission this morning, is I'd like to basically talk about intersections, and kind of use that as kind of an analogy for what we go through in our lives when we interchange. Now, the whole thing with COVID, as you know, changed everything. I mean, it changed everything. All of a sudden, we didn't necessarily anticipate it. All of a sudden, we get clobbered at the intersection. This was March of 2020, and all of a sudden, things change. You can't go out, you can't go to grocery stores, you can't go to work, and just all of this stuff. All of a sudden you're home, and it's changed since then for many of you. I know it's changed your lives. For some of you, you lost friends over it. For some of you, you moved. Lots of things happened during that time. And the shock of it all sometimes has just, it creates all kinds of other issues. For some people, substance abuse, like they just were home and worried about this and in fear and so on, and they turned to substance, they turned to gambling, they turned to other things, So the first thing to acknowledge is that we are not alone in this change. I mean, this change is the first one in a long time, maybe forever, that changed everything in our world, because 8 billion people experienced this change at one time. And it created fear, it created all kinds of different things for them. And intersections like this sometimes do change everything. Genesis, the book of Genesis, the first book in the Bible, starts with an intersection. And in this intersection, God made everything good, everything is moving along. But then there's an intersection. Satan has somehow disguised himself as a talking snake. And some of you hear that and you think, that is just too weird. I can't believe that. So that's okay. But there's this intersection with evil. We all know that the evil took place because we all know what evil is. And so some kind of an intersection took place. And that's where the first intersection happens. And then there's all kinds of other intersections where, Moses intersects with God, and Abraham intersects with God, David intersects with God. God is at work in all these different things. And we see there's pain, there's all kinds of stuff that comes up at these intersections of life. Now, here's the deal. You cannot prevent the intersections. You're going to have them. You're going to experience them. Things are going to come along that are going to change your life. And when they do, you're forced into change that you didn't ask for, forced into change that you didn't want. Sometimes we, create the intersections ourselves, like marriage and having kids and things like that. What's interesting is that even the good intersections change your life. They change your life. Now, my bottom line in all of this is that the cross of Jesus represents one of those intersections where God saw the mess, saw the pain, saw the suffering, and he came down and intersected human life, and he died at the intersection. So this is kind of be the analogy of how this works out in our lives. Jesus meets us here in the furnace. He meets us at those intersections. He meets us in the difficult parts of life, but he didn't save himself from it. He actually went through it. So this is the illustration, of course, of the intersection. These intersections, in this case, Jesus coming here and intersecting all of us life. We're all going this way, and all of a sudden, he intersects life, and he changed things forever. Now, one of the things that you have to think about when you're in life, as you're part of life, is ask yourself the question, how did I get here from there? How did I get here from there? Sometimes, you get a great job and you make a lot of money and so on, and you think, well, how did I get here from there? Never thought this was going to happen. When you get married, you have to ask the question, how did I get here from there? When Lori and I got married, and I actually met her out in Saskatchewan back in 1977, and so the question is, I had to ask myself, how did I meet this gorgeous girl? And I realized that I could trace it back to another intersection where I broke up with another girl, and it changed the whole course of my life in terms of where I was going from there, and it ended up with Lori and ended up here in Canada. It's a little scary when you think about how important these intersections are. I've told you the story about my dad being on an aircraft carrier that got hit by a kamikaze plane in World War II. So he said that when they first called him to the battle stations, he was a topside fireman, and so he was heading up there, and instead of running across the hangar deck of this aircraft carrier like he usually did, he decided to go up the stairs. He's halfway up the stairs when this plane crashes through the deck and explodes right where he would have been running. Now, you think about that, that would have changed everything. I mean, I wouldn't be here, that's for sure. He wouldn't be here, and lots of people's lives would not have been changed, as he was a change agent. He helped people to change. So there are lots of intersection. We just have no idea, which turn we make and how things are going to change there. Now, we'd like to think, I'd like to figure out my life so I can avoid all the bad intersections of life. I mean, who wouldn't? Okay? But it's interesting, even the good intersections, can, bring some struggles. Like, for instance, let's say you won Lotto 649, which is highly unlikely, because you know how this works. Probably 50 people in 1 year maybe win this thing. So if you win Lotto 649, that's great. You have lots of money. You can go out and buy a new car, a new home, and all that stuff. But the deal is that all your friends and your relatives know that you just won a great big, pot of money, and they're going to help you. So it brings sometimes consequences that we don't really even think about. It brings change. Intersections always bring change. Every intersection has a shadow side to it, and the shadow side to every intersection is change. For me, I change cars. Maybe you had an intersection. The change for you is you got married. Now, to be honest, life really is all about change, isn't it? I mean, it's unavoidable, It's kind of the uninvited part of life, when it comes to us. I mean, how many of you remember puberty? Of course you don't, It's been too long ago. And maybe some of you aren't done with it yet, and you're 45, But within minutes, well, not within minutes, but within months, all of a sudden you lose interest in your toys, and you lose interest in all these different things. And all of a sudden there's this, guy you like, or there's this girl you like, and they don't even know that you exist. And it hurts. Oh, it hurts down inside, It brings changes to your life. Then there are the major intersections of life where you leave home, and all of a sudden, you have, no accountability and lots of responsibility. That happens. Some people come to merge intersections in their lives where they find somebody that they love and they think to themselves, oh, this is going to be heaven. A few months in, they think it's not heaven. It's the biggest change that you've ever experienced in your life. One of the intersections that people sometimes have is, having kids. You dream of them and you pray for them, and long for them. You think, oh, someday, Then, you have a child and you realize for the next 18 years or more, there are no days off. And if you have more children, more days, kind of on the warpath. You can anticipate some of the intersections, but you can't anticipate all of them. Nobody gets married thinking that they're going to divorce, but divorces sometimes happen. And all of a sudden, there's kind of a divided road ahead. Or, you get a job, and you don't think you're going to leave the job. You want to just stay there, but, you lose the job. And it's divided road ahead. And here's what we know. Change produces stress. Now, I talked about that in the first message, but if you're wondering why you feel disoriented or anxious or sad, well, we've been through some major changes. Some of the most major, we've experienced, some suspect, about 10 years of change in 2 years. That is going to mess with your head. It's going to change things for your life. And then change, even good change, forces us to end something and begin something else. My nephew and his wife are in the process of moving. Actually, they have 2 houses now because they're going to be moving to the next one, and they haven't actually taken ownership of it yet. And they haven't sold their old one yet, so they got 2 houses. But they had 3 daughters, and they needed more room, so they have a house now that's 2.5 times the size of the old one. Now, what do you think they're going to experience? Well, it's going to be great, right? Have all this space. But like most people who move, they're going to be trying to find things that kind of got lost in the shuffle, and they're going to get up for the bathroom in the night, and they're going to be running into stuff. That's what change does. It disorients you. You get an exciting new job, and it's great, but you begin to think inside, am I going to actually be able to do this job? Like I did the old one okay, but what about the new one? We know that, when we lose something, and that's the point, when we lose something, we have to grieve, and we don't necessarily think about that until we realize that even though, the old wasn't perfect, you still have to grieve the loss. Now, this will seem strange to you, and I'm going to just make myself a little bit vulnerable, maybe seem a little bit stupid here, but I kind of remember feeling sentimental when I had to give up my teddy bear, like I'm moving in, and moving along in life and leaving childhood, His name was Teddy. Terribly creative name for a teddy bear, right? But he'd been an old friend. He'd been there through sicknesses. He'd been there through 4 moves, and, he was there for every Christmas Eve, But Lori was right, Teddy had to go. Change is always followed by some fear and some anxiety. Like I mentioned, you get a new job, and it's the job that you applied for. You wanted the job, but there's this anxiety. Am I actually going to be able to do that job? And then when you have children, you think, okay, this is going to be great. I'm going to be a parent, but am I going to screw up this child's life? And what about their lives? What are their lives going to bring my way? Is it going to be more difficult? We spend a lot of time and money getting married, and then you think to yourself, well, this guy seems different than the guy that I was engaged to. Maybe he's a closet, blanket holding thumbsucker or something like that. You move, you love the new house, but the new house comes with neighbors, and who knows what they're hiding. Now, the first message I gave when it comes to this series called Broken, I talked about a scale. It's called the Holmes-Ray scale. And what it points out is that the more change there is, the more stress it creates. So as I mentioned, it starts out like 100 is the highest on this level, and it would include like the death of a spouse or the death of a child, something along that line. The problem is that when you have other things that go on, it raises the level, the amount of stress that you're under, and so on. For example, you may have the death of a child or the death of a spouse, and all of a sudden these other changes that go on in your life, where maybe you have to move, maybe you have to take a new job, maybe you have to, it throws financial burden on you, and it's a lot of other stuff that tends to stack up. Now, the interesting thing is that they came up with a scale back in 1975, so you can just imagine, just the amount of change that has gone on since that time. So these things stack up and creates all kinds of problems, which helps you to understand why the whole thing with COVID was wrecked so many people. It's because it brought change at almost every level of their lives. And so it made them angry, made them afraid, and so on. Now, let me mention something else. There is a difference between change and transition. Change is what happens to you externally. Like, you get in an accident and all of a sudden things change. Your car changes, lots of stuff changes. But then, transition means that you have to work through that. For example, I had to go out and find another car. I had to do all these things, get things back to normal again. So there's difference between the two. Bridges puts it this way. He says, transition is the natural process by which one dies to a new life. A transition begins with an ending. Change brings the ending, and then you have to decide what you're going to do with it from that point on. Let me illustrate this. So, your daughter turns 12 years old, and all of a sudden everything changes. Her body begins to change. Her attitude towards you begins to change, and the Barbies have to go, with all due respect to the new Barbie movie. Things have changed. So is this a change or a transition? Well, it's a change, right? Transition means that she's actually going to make her way into adulthood. You date somebody for 3 years, and finally the big day is here, and there's lots of people, lots of food, lots of money going out the door, lots of celebration. Then you settle into your new home. So you're officially married. So is that a change or a transition? Well, it's a change. Changes everything. How you transition into the next phase of your life is up to you. One more. Let me just give you this. Now let me tell you a story about a man named Jed. Poor mountaineer, barely kept his family fed. And then one day when he was shooting at some food, up from the ground came a bubbling crude, oil that is, black gold, Texas tea. Now is that a change or a transition? If you know the storyline, if you watch the Beverly Hillbillies ever, you realize that they changed, but they never transitioned. They, kind of kept on doing things the way they had. To experience change but never transition is dangerous. Somebody gets married, and they never actually transition into a marriage, being a married person, it will likely blow it up. You can't change and not transition and have things go well. Life is change, and growth is optional, and that's the whole point. You want to keep on growing. Now, the first thing you have to go through, as I've already mentioned, is the endings phase. And when you end something, even if it's a good thing, you have to grieve it. You have to process it. It means letting go of the past, letting go of the old, and then taking the new. It's kind of like if winter is kind of the neutral zone that you go into when you're moving from fall, which is a time of change, and it's kind of everything's frozen over. It seems like nothing's going on, but then the transition is into spring, which is basically where you want to be. Now, can anybody guess why I'm talking about all this stuff in the context of broken, when life rocks your world? Well, it's because of the fact that we have to transition. We have to move into this new phase. When life rocks your world, things get broken, and you need to figure out how are you going to move into the new reality. And a lot of people are disoriented. A lot of people are afraid, scared for their lives. The change happened, and now everybody in the whole world has to decide whether or not they're going to transition into the new reality that we face right now. Now, here's the thing. When I got clobbered at the intersection, somebody else got clobbered too. It was a guy that hit me, totally wrecked his car. He was going on a golf date and totally wrecked that too. So I felt bad about that. But the truth is that intersections happen. We get distracted, or we're, messing with our Bluetooth on our phone or something. By the way, I wasn't doing that. But stuff happens, and we get into these accidents, and sometimes it happens. So that's the reality of, traffic intersections. But here's the deal. If you're not careful at the intersections of life, you can make a change and go way off course before you even realize it, and do a lot of stuff. Like example, how did I get here? Well, that's a good change, right? How did I get here from there? That's a good change. There are people in prison who ask themselves the question, how did I get here from there? And usually it's one intersection, one wrong turn at a time, and sometimes they lead to that. Now, Jesus and history tell us that when we're coming into these intersections, we need support. We've already talked about one of these, and that's that we need friends. That's what the church was intended to be. It was people traveling together because they were going to face a lot of intersections, and when everything else is changing, what you don't want to have change is your friends. We were intended to travel with friends, with people who would love us and support us and accept us, people that we would love and support and accept and help when change comes along and life gets really difficult. And what's interesting is that Jesus was the example of this, if anybody could have been the Lone Ranger, this guy, changes water to wine, and he multiplies bread, he stops storms, he raises the dead. Jesus could do anything. If anybody could do the Lone Ranger, he could. But yet, when he started up what he was doing, he decided he was going to travel with a group of 12 people. A number of women and other people who were kind of on the fringes of that, who were part of that, The chosen. Very important thing. So why don't we do that? Well, one of the things is fear. We're afraid, What if I get rejected? What if I accept these people and then I get voted off the island? And the other one, of course, is the lack of time. We, have a limited amount of time and so on, and we, are busy doing all kinds of things, and it takes time to do that. And yet, really, what we need in our lives when things are changing, we need margin. Because life can only hold so much without blowing up like a balloon would blow up. A margin, as you know, is kind of the white space around the edges of any page. It makes it easier to read. Margin is what we need in life to be able to be flexible with life. Now, most people don't want to be the victim of change. I don't, I know that. And yet things happen whether or not we want them to. Things happen in our lives. And at some point, what we have to do is we have to say, I am not going to just roll over like a turtle on its back, with its feet kicking in the air. Like, I'm going to respond. I'm going to grow. And maybe that's one of the things. What am I learning? What am I learning? There's a new cool leadership word. So talked about this, how there's an intersection, and there has to be an endings, and then there has to be letting go. And then there's this new cool word, leadership word called pivot. And what that basically means is change is going to hit you, okay? Change is going to hit you. And so this means that you shift things to make change work for you instead of wrecking you, instead of destroying your life. So we have to pivot. Now, there's a group of people in the world for whom change is like a regular part. They love it and they do it all the time. Anybody know who that would be? Well, let me give you a clue. You were one once. And it's babies, babies love to do it. Can you imagine a baby, starting to talk and so on? And it's always funny because they always say stuff that, it's a little bit off and so on. It just makes you laugh. So can you imagine a baby watching everybody laugh and saying, well, I'm never going to talk again because they laughed at me. Well, they keep on trying. They'll keep on trying new words and everything. When they're walking, they'll stand up and fall down, stand up and fall down. Sure, fortunately, they have a, kind of a small point of gravity, low point of gravity there. So that they do this regularly. Like, this is something that is easy for them. But then there comes a point where it's not fun anymore. Okay, I've never had my kids, when they turned into their teenage years. I didn't remember a single conversation where they came and he sat down at my feet and he said, Dad, why don't you give us kind of a seminar on life? Why don't you tell us about the mistakes that you made, because it would be dumb for us to make the same mistakes. It doesn't happen, does it? If you won't learn, then what has happened is you're going to experience pain, and it's not going to work in your direction. It's not going to work for you, See, one of the questions that we have to ask when change hits us, and especially this last boatload of change, what have I learned? Like, what am I learning about me? What am I learning about, life? What am I learning about, disease? I mean, there's just lots of things that we can learn about. In the past 20 years since we started the Olive Branch, I've learned some painful lessons. I've learned what I'm good at. I've learned what I'm not good at, lots of different things. I've learned lessons as a dad and a husband, but one of the most important lessons that I've learned is listen to people who love you, because, they have your best interest in heart. They're not trying to hurt you. Listen to people who love you. And here's another learning, okay? If you humble yourself, you likely won't have to be humiliated, okay? And I would rather humble myself than to be humbled. One more piece of advice here. In the middle of the awkwardness and the uncertainty and the pain of change, don't forget to live life. Sometimes, when we get in a tight situation or a tough situation, we think to ourselves, well, when this happens, then I'm going to do this, or when this happens, I'm going to do this. And it's like we kind of retire from life for a while, and you just can't do that. Like, you just have to sometimes embrace the change, embrace the pain that you're going through, reach out for it, and just keep moving forward. And you find out that God is there in the middle of it all. Don't let change be an accident at the intersection that cripples you and stops you. You don't want that. But that's not the end. There's another critical part here, and this is probably more important than any of the other things that I've said. Who are you trusting during this time? Who are you trusting? Now, the politically correct politically correct thing to say, especially in church, is, well, I'm trusting Jesus, of course, Well, and the question is are you actually trusting him, or is he just along for the ride? I could say, when I was at that intersection, I wrecked at that intersection, I was with Jesus because I'd been talking to him for the past 20 minutes, and he was sitting right there with me, and that would all be true. But that's not the question. The question is, who are you trusting as you go through life? There's a lot of people in our world that would say, hey, I'm trusting me. I'm pretty much the only trustworthy one in my life, so I'm trusting me. I think I can pull this off myself. And if you're saying that, I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm just saying you're deceiving yourself because nobody knows what lies ahead. Everybody needs somebody to help them. And that's why Jesus showed up, you see. His intersection came here, and he intersected things with us because of the fact that he wanted to change things. And he's at work right now in all the world situations. The Russia-Ukraine thing, he's at work, in economics. He's at work, in the healthcare system and governments and everything. He's at work there. But that's not the core of his work. That's not the core reason why he came. He came to change hearts because that's where the problem started. It didn't start with governments. All that stuff is run by human beings. And he didn't come to make us more biblical. He didn't come to help us, follow the law better. He didn't come to help us keep our nose clean and not get into major trouble. He came to change our hearts and change the reason why we live. Because that's what he wants to do through us. And the good news is that there's another kingdom. And it's a kingdom of hearts. And God is at work there. It's been infiltrated by the power of God. The Holy Spirit comes to live within us. He comes to change us. And this is what's going to answer Jesus' prayer. Let your kingdom come. Your will be done here on earth as it's done in heaven. That's what he ultimately wants. See, you and I weren't created to just do life all by ourselves. We were created to follow the one who created us, the one who made us. David talks about this in a psalm that he wrote. It's called Psalm 23, simply as we know it, the Good Shepherd Psalm, 23rd Psalm. And he talks about this. He says that if you want to finish well, then he says you have to have a good shepherd who's going to help you along the way. And this whole thing starts out, he says, the Lord's my shepherd. I have everything I need. Think about that. He says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. In other words, I find that I am at peace in life and I can sleep at night, because he's watching over things. He leads me beside still waters. He makes sure that my heart is refreshed, that I get the water that I need for my spiritual life. And then he helps me to know the right way to take. And I'll tell you, that's where most of us need at the intersection, because you and I are going to hit intersections, and we will have to turn one way or the other. He says, there are sometimes when I take the wrong turn, or sometimes when I take the right turn, and I find myself in this dark, awful place, the valley of the shadow of death. But I won't be afraid when I'm walking through there, because you're with me. Your rod, your staff comfort me. And then there's this fascinating thing. You prepare the table. In other words, you go ahead of me. You prepare the place for me that you want for me. And you do these things that I would never suspect out there in the future of my life that I don't know about yet, because you're there. Anoint my head with oil. You bless my life, And surely goodness, what you pour into my life, the goodness and the love that you pour into my life is going to splash on other people. It's going to make a difference. It's going to make things different behind me because I've been there. That's what you want, isn't it? Don't you want to know, like at the end of the game, don't you want to know that the way you've lived has changed people's lives? That you've left things better than you found them? Because you've been following a good shepherd. And the deal is, it's not like some people have shepherds and some don't. Everybody has a shepherd, but not everybody has a good shepherd. And not every shepherd knows the way home. And that's the bottom line, isn't it? Take me home with you. Dwell in your house forever. That's what everybody wants. So you have to decide who you're going to follow. You're just going to do your own thing? Try to figure it out when you hit the intersections and figure out which way you're going to go and what you're going to do and what you're not going to do? Or will you let God guide you? Will you let him help you? Will you let him give you the strength? Will you let him prepare the way ahead of you and then guide you in that way because he knows where it is? He's promised he would. Everybody has a shepherd. Everybody has a shepherd that they follow. Everybody has someone that they turn to. Everybody has something that they turn to, and they think it's going to answer the questions and solve their problems at all the intersections of life. But God is the one who knows the intersections. And I'm telling you, he would be your shepherd. He will help you find your way. He will walk with you through life so that you can make the difference that you want to make and so that you can go where you want to go. I pray that he will. Let's pray together. Thank you, God, that you intersected life through Jesus, your son. You came to change this world. You came to change us. You came to guide us and help us at the intersection so that they're not just these bloody messes where we wreck our lives. You want to guide every person who's listening to me. You want to help them. But they need you at the very core if you're going to do them any good. And I pray that they would allow you to come into their lives and help them at this intersection, this very intersection, right now, today. Amen. So may God guide you as the Good Shepherd. May he help you find your way. May you have the assurance that he's going before you, that he's going to protect you in the dark times, and that he knows where he's going. Amen.